It was mid-July before I heard back from Natalie. Well, it didn't take long, she said from her air-conditioned office in Florida. What didn't take long? I asked. Selling the book. I was at a loss for words. She'd found a publisher? And what? It hadn't even been a month? Are you still there? She said, laughing. Who bought it? The publishing rights or the movie rights? The movie rights, said I. Someone was going to make a movie based on my book? No. She laughed, then choked on the cigarette she must have inhaled while laughing. Calm down, kid, she said. No one's bought it yet. I felt like a deflated balloon. Pop, so fast. We're in the middle of an auction war, she continued. Which is what, exactly? When something's really good, when they think it's really going to take off, all the publishers bid on the book. Then I go back to them. Sort of like an auction with 5 or 6 dozen phone calls. And that's good? Oh yeah, she sighed, coughing again. It's really good. And the movies? Same thing. 4 different producers are bidding for the option. An option? Yes. If the book shoots, becomes a hit, they can exercise their option and buy the movie rights. How did they find out about the book? I asked. They found out it was, well, worth it. They have people at the publishing houses who keep them in the loop. So what are we talking about? Said I. About money? I fell silent, afraid to say anything else. Well, kid, she said, her voice turning serious. You better tell me you're already working on something else. Almost finished an outline, I said. And it's a thriller about Lieutenant Randolph? Actually, I said, yes, I liked him. He's a good character. Over the phone, I heard a sigh of relief. Thank God, she said. It's going to raise prices. Why? Because, Natalie replied, everyone agreed he's a great character. Difficult, moody, but likable. And smart as a whip and manly. That will help sell him to a female audience. Oh, I said, not quite understanding. And, she continued, just like in movies, publishers want to bet on a proven star. They like books in a series. You know? Jack Reacher, Inspector Rebus, Hercule Goddamn Poirot. Just like we've already seen about a million Friday the 13th movies? Oh, I said, now realizing. Well, that shouldn't be a problem. Good. So, I said, afraid to ask again. Well, she said, choosing her words carefully. If things work out the way they're shaping up, you'll be writing only about our little friend Lieutenant Randolph for a long time to come. We're talking about a 3-book deal. And? And you'll be a millionaire, Natalie said. Several times that if the books are made into movies. At those words, my eyes nearly popped out of my forehead. Sure, I knew it was a lucrative business if you made the bestseller list. But a millionaire all at once? So get moving on the outline, okay? Sure thing, boss. And one more thing, she said. What? I've arranged with your editor, the one in Chicago, to help you with that. Huh? Yes. And who is he? She, Natalie corrected me. She's from Chicago. We use her services sometimes. I'll give her your number. You're going to meet her as soon as possible. You two need to follow through on this as soon as possible, okay? Of course, I said. Okay then, Natalie said with finality. Wait, I said before she could hang up. That editor, what's her name? She laughed. Oh yeah, I guess that helps. She coughed again, already more prolonged. This is Marisa Key. You'll like her. As I hung up, I heard her laugh at that last comment. Marisa Key? I'm going to like her? That's funny? The next morning, bright and early over a cup of coffee, my cell phone rang. Who is it? Said Dad, still reading the paper and taking a bite of toast. I don't know, I answered, not recognizing the number 773 before opening the receiver. Hello? Tyler Collins? She said. The voice was indescribable. somewhere between deep and high, but not in between. And there was a note of something in it, just like the way she said my name. It sounded like a half question, half assertion. Speak up, I said. This is Marisa Key, she continued. Your editor. Miss Key, I said. I've been expecting you. How is your day going? She said, skipping the small talk. Oh, give me a second. I closed the mouthpiece and looked at Dad. What does today look like? We're up, he said, still reading the paper. Maybe a few hours in the morning, but nothing special. I'm free from 11, I said into the phone. Great, she said. I'll be there at 11:30. You're coming here? I asked, glad I wouldn't have to drive to Chicago. Yes, she confirmed. Are there any hotels in where you're located? Grant City, I said. And yes, we have hotels here. 2 of them. Great. Then I'll be there by 11:30. At the hotel? At your house, she said, flustered by the unnecessary conversation. Do you know where I live? Yes. Okay then, I said. She disconnected without another word. What was Natalie imposing on me? By 11:15, Dad had left for Mom's, and I had washed the fine hazelnut dust off my skin and hair. I changed into clean khaki pants, a light blue Oxford shirt with the cuffs rolled up for the summer heat, and sockless sneaker shoes. I was putting on the finishing touches, brushing my wet and unruly hair when the doorbell rang. Marisa Key had arrived early. I ran the comb through my hair one last time, checked to make sure I'd shaved thoroughly enough, and rushed to the stairs. Why am I rushing like a tardy schoolboy? I thought, forcing myself to slow down as I approached the door. Because her voice on the phone, her unceremonious mannerisms made me feel like I was dating a second-grade teacher, I realized. When I opened the door, however, I saw that Marisa Key would never be mistaken for a second-grade teacher. Maybe a Lou Reed groupie, but no way a school teacher. Mr. Collins, she said in an indistinguishable accent. I nodded and stepped back, looking her over from head to toe. She was almost as tall as me, maybe 5'9", with impossibly long legs and long, muscular facial features. And thin, too. Painfully thin. Like a runway model living on bottled water and low-fat crackers. Just 2, thanks. Her hair was short but thick and spiky, like she'd stuck her finger in an outlet. Her face was part female, part Indian, with a dash of Asian. A braid-curved face with a small chin, high cheekbones, small but full Cupid's bow lips, a small snub nose, and large, deep-set brown eyes slanted at the corners, which gave them an Asian tinge. All in all, Marisa Key could have been a runway model. She certainly had the physique, exotic facial features and the long, awkward, gangly gait of a newborn foal. However, none of that matched her closet and makeup. Her clothes were straight out of a punk rock concert. Tight black jeans, black leather motorcycle boots with metal studs, a tight t-shirt, studded black leather bracelets on her wrists, and a large black leather bag slung over her shoulder. Her makeup only emphasized it. Black mascara, lipstick, nail polish, and a diamond stud in her left nostril. It was impossible to guess her age from her general appearance. She could pass for 18, but she could have been my age. Where are we going to work? She said, ignoring my wandering gaze and the amazed expression I knew was written all over my face. Do you have a dining table? She asked. I nodded, focusing my gaze on her impossibly dark brown eyes. Can you run a cord from there to your laptop? Yes, I said. Sure. Great, she said, turning toward the kitchen and searching the dining room with her eyes. Take your laptop and bring it to the table. I obeyed. A few minutes later, the laptop was working, and we sat down at the table. She put the laptop in front of her and asked me to move closer so we could both see the screen. Okay, she said, once I had the final version of Long Gone downloaded. It's time to get to work. She reached into her black bag and pulled out a tattered copy of the Long Gone manuscript. It was huge, at least 6 inches thick, bound with several thick rubber bands and complete with hundreds of yellowed notes pasted all over the manuscript. Have you read it yet? I asked, watching her remove the rubber bands. Of course. And what do you think? Said I, fishing for a compliment. She turned and stared at me. Her look spoke for itself. You're wasting my time. You're a capable writer, Mr. Collins, she said. Tyler, I replied, machine generously. Then I paused. Just capable? She made a grimace. It's better than most. Really? Really, she said, unfolding the first 10 pages in front of us. Now can we get started? Sure. Good, she said, emphasizing that we wouldn't waste any more time. And we didn't. Jesus, what's there to say? She'd had the manuscript for a week, and it was covered with her notes. Notes about little things. Isn't there a better word for it? What are you trying to say? Is that the best way to say it? Reinforce this passage. You're letting the conflict subside. The tension dies. And that's just the first 60 pages, which took us up to 6:30. In 7 hours, we took 2 bathroom breaks and she took 3 smoke breaks, standing on the back porch looking off into the distance, puffing on a cigarette. I tried to strike up a conversation with her during the first smoke break, but her look told me it wasn't a good idea. I had to admit, though, she was good. Just goddamn good. I was amazed when I reread the first 15 pages of my final manuscript, the manuscript that would probably make me a millionaire. The changes were barely noticeable. One word here, one sentence there, the dialogue became more vague here and more explicit here. But the overall effect was magical. It really was a huge improvement. Well, she said, pushing away from the table as I read our changes. Okay, her changes. Enough for one day? Said I. She nodded. I'm hungry. Are there any decent restaurants in this town? I smiled. Well, she said, can I take you out to dinner? She shook her head. That won't be necessary, Mr. Collins. Probably not, I said. But I want to. Her look told me to back off, which made me try harder. Look, I said, I really want to talk about this. About you. About how you do it. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to take you out to dinner. She looked at me intently with her lips pressed together and said nothing. I decided to wait for her while trying to make an innocent face. After a moment, a smile flickered at the corners of her lips, the closest resemblance to a smile I'd seen all day. Great, she said, reaching out and gathering the loose manuscript pages into a neat stack. Then we'll make this a working dinner. We should have time to do another 10 pages. I tried to show with body language and a droopy face that this wasn't what I meant, but she ignored me. Bring the laptop, she said, pushing away from the desk and slinging her bag over her shoulder. I obeyed. Again. All thoughts of Marisa Key being anorexic were quickly dispelled at dinner. I watched her steadily devour a bowl, not a cup, of gazpacho, followed by the main course, Mexican stuffed meatloaf with grilled zucchini and chipotle cheese mashed potatoes. When she finished, the plate looked like it had just been pulled out of the dishwasher. Still hungry? I asked, looking at my half-eaten braised brisket sandwich with a side of fresh fruit. Sure, she replied, pushing her plate away and placing mine in front of her. And all the while she ate, we continued to edit the manuscript. It went faster now, as I learned to trust her advice, and she learned to trust my taste in sentence construction and word choice. The waitress came over as Marisa was finishing the last of the fruit. It was Nicole. She and her husband owned the place. She glanced at the plates, then at Marisa. Dessert? What do you have? Asked Marisa, not lifting her eyes from the laptop she was rooting around behind. There was disbelief in Nicole's gaze. I only shrugged slightly and smiled back. Nicole offered a choice of dessert, and Marisa chose bananas Foster with cinnamon ice cream. 2 scoops? Said Nicole. Marisa looked at her, then at me. Would you like one, Mr. Collins? I only smiled and shook my head. Just coffee, please. Nicole nearly burst out laughing, but Marisa didn't notice. Would you stop calling me Mr. Collins? I said. That's your name, she replied, pointing to the manuscript. How about this one? I prefer Tyler, I said, not holding back. We're probably about the same age, right? Whatever, she said, showing impatience again. Okay, Tyler. I'll call you Tyler, okay? So, Tyler, what do we do here? Tyler? Yeah, I said, smiling at her annoyance. Great. Let's change it up. How? What do you have in mind? For you to tell me how to tighten it, she said, her speech becoming slow. No, I said. I wanted to have dinner to get ideas on how to better edit my work. Instead, we spent the evening editing, and you never said anything to me. So I want to know how you would have done it, and I want you to tell me why. Hell, I want you to tell me how you even saw this. 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 This flaw. She frowned, then looked at the laptop and saved her work to both the internal hard drive and the flash drive. Closing the laptop, she pushed it aside and reassembled the manuscript, which she placed on the laptop and pushed it aside just in time for Nicole to place dessert in front of her. Taking a spoonful and taking a bite, she turned to me. Okay, shoot. What do you want to know? How old are you? 25. How did you get into this field? Editing? I'm in graduate school at Northwestern University, working on my doctorate. That pays the bills. Specialty? English and creative writing. Have you written anything? Anger flashed across her face, but she said nothing. And how long have you been editing professionally? 4 years. Why do you do it? Like I said, it pays the bills. Teaching, isn't cheap. I nodded. How long did it take you to go through and practically tear apart every page of my manuscript? Her eyes narrowed. No need to take offense, she said. It's my work. I'm not offended, I protested. I'm curious. Jesus, I spent 2 months editing and you just got it last week. So how long did it take? 3 days, she replied, shoving another Bananas Foster into her mouth. It's really good, by the way. Are you sure you don't want some? No, I'm fine, I said, but she was already holding a spoonful of ice cream and caramelized bananas in front of my mouth. Really? She said. Try some. I rolled my eyes and tasted it. You're right, I said, taking the spoon from her and taking a bite of a banana slice covered in caramel and melted ice cream. She smiled, the first real smile of the day. Look, she said as we shared the rest of our dessert, I did well on Sunday morning. I worked 17 to 18 hours a day for 3 days. And what was the first thing you did? Read the whole book. Twice. You read fast? She shook her head. Fast, but not exactly speed reading. You still get faster the second time. You know what you're reading. The second time, I start making notes where the plot is weaker, if a word or phrase catches me out, if something is unclear. You know. I nodded. I thought I knew. I thought I knew very well until I met her and saw her find errors on every other page of my manuscript. Now I realized I didn't know shit. So, what's after that? She scooped up the last bite of dessert and held the spoon out to me. I waved it away to her obvious delight. After that, she said, I just keep repeating it. And how many times have you repeated it? She shrugged. I don't know. 12? Maybe 14? A lot. Do you get paid well for that? She hesitated before answering. Good enough. Cover your expenses while you're here? She shook her head. They want me to drive to Chicago and back every day, but that's not practical. I pulled out my cell phone. Who are you calling? She asked, her eyes widening. They're paying for your room, I said. And for food. She shook her head frantically and reached out to take the phone from me. I turned over my shoulder to block her. Natalie, I said when she answered. Hey, Tyler, she whispered. I'd never met her, but I imagined Thelma Diamond, the old bailiff from Night Court, smoking cigarettes as she talked to me. Maurice is here, I said. Good, she giggled, And, and she needs the publisher, whoever it is, to pay for her room and board while she's here. But she's only an hour away, Natalie protested. That's 2 hours a day spent traveling when it could have been spent following through, I said. Natalie was silent for a moment before she spoke. Are you willing to put things on hold until this is done? Yes, I said, looking at Marisa, who was staring at me intently. Natalie sighed. Great. After all, how much does a room in Podunk, Illinois cost? And Natalie. What? It was done at my insistence, I said, looking directly at Marisa as I spoke. Marisa is pissed that I'm even asking for it, okay? Natalie laughed her husky laugh. I told you she was a pistol. No, I said. You didn't tell me anything. Just a vague warning that turned out to be all too true. Natalie seemed to decide that was the funniest thing she'd heard all day. She was still laughing out loud when I slammed the phone down. You need to pay for school, I said, tucking the phone into my pocket. 1,000 or so for room and board is better taken care of by those who can afford it, okay? But the look didn't leave her face. Instead, she stomped to the restroom, then went back and gathered all her things. 8 o'clock? She said, looking down at me. I'll see you then. By the end of the next day, we had gone through another 70 pages of the manuscript, going back over the first 60 pages and making more changes. By the end of the day, I was exhausted both mentally and physically. That's enough, Marisa said, nonchalantly watching me wipe the fatigue from my eyes. I nodded. Tomorrow then, she said, getting up and putting everything in her bag. Wait, I said, holding out my hand to her. She yanked it away and stared at me. What? She purred. Why are you so angry? Said I. All day you've been, well, pissed off anyway. You didn't have to do that, she said. What? Book a hotel room and food? She only grinned back. I didn't do it just for you, I said. I did it so we could finish the job faster. Yeah, she said, still tense and angry. Whatever. I just don't understand why it's so... Because, she muttered. Because they don't want the hired editors to make too many demands, Mr. Collins. Because if we do, they'll just leave to someone else. Do you understand, Mr. Collins? So you got what you wanted, but I might get less work because of it. So there you go. Are you satisfied now? I could only stare back, embarrassed that I had tried to do something good for her and probably only ruined her livelihood. Then I reached for my phone and dialed the number. Still good? Wheezed Natalie. Great, I replied. She's incredible. Natalie let out a hoarse laugh. Yeah, right. No, really, I said. We're really making progress. That's great, babe. That call yesterday, I said. Is she going to get in trouble for that or something else? Publishers can get sassy, she said. Depends on who gets the book, really. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't think you cared, she said, surprised by the sudden anger in my voice. Then don't do it, I said. I'll take care of it myself, okay? Tyler, Natalie said, I'll take care of it, okay? Really. We're not taking any chances, I said, looking at Marisa. Her features were still impassive, bordering on annoyance, with a new tinge of too little and too late. You really like her, don't you? Said Natalie, flabbergasted. She's goddamn gorgeous, I said. And I want to make damn sure she works with me when the next one is ready. Good, Natalie said. Consider it done. Hell, we'll split it if that's okay with you. No, I said. I'll take care of everything myself. If that's what you want, she said, her voice soft, like she was smitten. And all this mess, I said. It's going to stay between us, okay? And you won't hold any grudges against her in the future, right? I wouldn't do that, she protested. But perhaps her protests were too vigorous. I'm serious, I said. If she doesn't get a job because I was a dumbass, I'll know about it. And if she doesn't work on my next book when it's ready, I'll know why. Okay? Calm down, Tyler, Natalie said. I said it's forgotten, so it's forgotten. Okay, I softened. Thank you. And I'm sorry for sticking my nose in. Don't worry about it, babe, she wheezed before hanging up. I turned and looked at Marisa. Okay? It was nothing more than a twitch, but her nod was palpable. And I'm sorry, I said. I won't pry again. She tightened her lips and pushed them to one side, then nodded again. Since I'm paying, I said, can I buy you dinner before you go back to your room for the night? Just a burger, she said. Not as expensive as last night. I have money to buy you a better dinner than... Just a burger, she repeated. I stared at her for a moment, watching her eyes flash again. The hitching rail it is, I said, pushing away from the table. Chapter 10. We drove to the restaurant in separate cars, and I got there first. No sooner had I walked through the door than I was greeted with a big hug and a kiss. Hi, Allie said, coming up for air. Hi, baby, I said, kissing her cheek and pulling her close to me again. It felt good to hold her, and for some reason I felt like I needed a hug. Probably because I just spent 10 hours with Marisa, who scowled, snorted, and generally treated me like shit. Have you eaten yet? She whispered in my ear. I shook my head and broke the hug. Actually, I'm meeting someone here, I said. Kind of like a work dinner. Oh, she said, almost pouting. But you could join us, I suggested. Is he here yet? I saw Marisa get out of the car and walk across the parking lot toward the entrance. She is, I said, nodding my head out the window. You're kidding, right? Said Allie, trying to hide her horror as she watched the tall, skinny goth girl walk through the door. Be smart, I whispered, then turned to Marisa as she walked in. Marisa, I'd like you to meet Allison. My girlfriend. Marisa nodded, looked at Allison, then held out her hand. Allison! Allison tried to smile in response to the handshake, but her gaze stopped at Marisa's black makeup and her spiked hair. Is it okay if she joins us for dinner? I said to Marisa. Your ticket, Marisa shrugged. Invite whoever you want. Met. A few minutes later, we were already seated and ordering. So do you want to work on this or what? Said Marisa to my right. Work on what? Asked Allie to my left. On his book, replied Marisa, giving me a quick glance. A book? I wrote a book, I explained. Really? Allie said, as if she didn't believe us. A book? And you're... What? His agent? Editor, Marisa muttered, staring into her Diet Coke. The book, repeated Allie, her face reflecting disbelief and excitement. You're not kidding? You write something and she edits it for you? Go ahead, show her, I said to Marisa. Marisa pulled a tattered manuscript out of her bag and rattled it in front of Allie. Holy shit, Allie said, running her fingers over the title and then flipping through the manuscript. It's huge. She looked at me. Yeah. I was going to tell you as soon as we found a publisher, I said. Not that it's a secret or anything. I looked directly at Marisa as I said the last words. So, how did you find a publisher? Said Allie, her eyes fixed on the manuscript as she leafed through it. The next hour passed in a discussion of when and why I started writing the book, what it was about, and all the things involved in getting it published. I tried to engage Marisa in conversation, but she seemed content with a burger and fries and a basket of cookies for dessert, only one of which she shared with Allie and me. Every once in a while, she would offer an explanation of the publishing process, but that was where it ended. Then Allie just put her on the spot, and Marisa had no choice but to respond. How many books have you edited so far? She asked Marisa. 19. Any of them that I've heard of? Marisa named 3 or 4 that had hit the bestseller lists. And this one? How does it compare to these? Allie asked. Marisa only shrugged. Come on, Allie prodded. You've seen the good ones and the not-so-good ones, right? They were all pretty good, Marisa said, avoiding my perplexed look. So what do you think of this one? She only chewed her lip in response, her shoulders and arms tensing as she grabbed the Diet Coke in front of her. "You're not hurting his feelings," Allie said. "Really, Tyler?" "Not at all," I agreed. "So how is it? How does it compare?" Marisa, however, didn't budge. Allie cast a glance at me. "What's going on here?" I shrugged. Allie turned to Marisa again, leaned over the table and lowered her voice. "Is it that bad?" Marisa threw her head up as if she'd been slapped. "You're kidding, right? That bad?" "So it's good?" clarified Allie. "It's the best thing I've ever worked on," Marisa said, then threw me a confused look. "So you think it's—" "I can't say if it will sell," she said, looking around the table. "But I can tell you that if the damn public can tell shit from shit, it'll be huge." Allie's mouth dropped open. "That good?" "Better," Marisa said. "You mean it's better than just the ability?" I said, smiling at her initial description of Long Gone. She looked at me, then back at the table. "Jesus, Tyler," Allie said, watching Marisa's reaction. "I'm sorry," I said. "Why don't we all go get a beer?" "Sure," Allie said, standing up. Marisa shifted her gaze from me to Allie, then back again. "I'll just go back and go to bed if that's okay." Allie tried to talk her into staying, but it didn't work. So Marisa left and Allie and I headed to the bar for a drink. Halfway through the first glass of beer, Allie started to smirk. "What?" I asked. "It's the beer," she said, making a grimace. "What's wrong with it?" "It doesn't taste right." "Let me get you another one," I said, turning to the bartender. "That's not the point," she said, leaning closer. "I'm just trying to think of something that might taste a little better." I understood. We hurried to her house and I soon discovered that she was right. It tasted a lot better than Amstel Light. "She's weird," Allison said as we cuddled together in post-coital bliss. "How so?" Allie snorted. "Like you haven't noticed." "You mean the makeup?" I suggested. "Black clothes and all that?" "For starters," she said, turning over to face me. "But well, she seems angry." "At me?" "More like at the whole world." I just stared back, mentally going over the few days I'd known Marisa and the hours we'd spent reading the book. "Not like a psychotic killer pissed off at the world," Allie explained. "More like life sucks and everyone else is an asshole. You know what I mean?" "Yeah," I said, starting to nod. "I guess you could look at it that way. But still—" "What?" asked Allie when I didn't finish my last sentence. I shrugged. "Just don't really know her, I guess. Maybe it's anger. Or maybe she's just shy or having a bad day. I mean, you only met her for an hour at dinner?" Allie looked into my eyes, considering my words. Then she smiled, turning into a smirk. "That's why I love you," she said. "You're so sweet. You just can't say bad things about anyone, can you?" "Love me?" I said, tensing at the mere mention of the word. Her smile grew even wider. "You know what I mean," she said, poking her head under the blanket and showing me exactly what she meant. I spent the next 5 days with Marisa. For 10 or 12 hours a day, we edited, tweaking, changing a word here and shortening it there. On the fourth morning, I noticed something I hadn't noticed the previous 2 days. Marisa was showing up with additional notes and changes to what we had already gone over. "When do you do this?" I asked. "What?" she snapped back, annoyed for the millionth time by my questions about wasting time. "Going back over what we've already reviewed? The changes we've already made?" "In the evening, after dinner. What difference does it make? It has to be done." Jesus, I thought. She comes back and works another 4 or 5 hours while I'm at the store, doing Dad's inventory reduction and bookkeeping. "I just didn't notice before," I said, "that you're doing this." She rolled her eyes, then looked at me impatiently. "Okay, good. Now you know. Can we get back to work?" And that's when I realized she wasn't actually that mad at the world. Allie was wrong. Marisa was angry a lot of the time. Definitely. But it was an anger born of suffering fools. She was focused, and when her attention strayed, she became impatient. I smiled at that realization and decided to test my hypothesis. So, are you seeing anyone? None of your business, she replied, without raising her eyes from the laptop she was typing some changes on. Have you ever been married? No answer, she said, turning back to the manuscript and pointing to the passage we just looked at. Are you sure about that? Yes, I said. What about children? Do you have kids? There it was, the straw that broke the camel's back. What the hell? She said. Who cares, Tyler? My personal life is none of your business. You care about this book, okay? And the sooner you stop worrying about my personal life and start worrying about turning this piece of shit into a readable story, the better off we'll both be. You said she's already pretty good, I replied, enjoying the argument you'd started. For an unpolished piece of shit, she said, standing up. But it needs some work, and we don't have a lot of time to do it. Then where are you going? Said I, getting up with her. Going outside for a smoke, she said, heading for the kitchen door. Alone. I smiled, watching as she opened her Zippo and lit up, puffing furiously to get rid of the tension I'd created. Just as she finished, my dad pulled into the driveway. I saw him get out of the car and look at the stranger smoking on his back porch. The look of horror on his face was priceless. I told him about the editor, but I didn't describe her. Besides, he'd been lost in rehab 15 hours a day for most of the previous 2 weeks, so he'd never seen her. When he opened the door and walked into the kitchen, I giggled, watching his face as he walked toward and then past her with inarticulate greetings, accompanied by a curt nod of Marisa's head. Is that? He whispered. Yes, I said excitedly. What do you think of her? He turned his head and looked, then turned back to me. You're kidding, right? Is she going to help you deal with this book? She is. Is she good? The look on his face told me he wouldn't believe any assurances of her competence, but I was feeling particularly swaggering that morning. Actually, Dad, she's an absolute genius. She's from Chicago, isn't she? It seemed obvious. Goth girls were unheard of in Grant City, even among the students at our local liberal arts and sciences college. I only smiled and nodded. Jesus, he said with a shake of his head as he walked past me and headed for the stairs to change into his work clothes. I could hear him muttering as he made his way up the stairs. Marisa returned from her smoke break a few minutes later, and we got back to business without further questions. When Dad went to the store, he'd go out the front door, avoiding us completely. Chapter 10. It was day 11, and Marisa and I were 23 pages away from finishing our work when my cell phone rang in the late morning. Natalie? I said. We finally got the winning bid, she said, and her enthusiasm almost spilled out through the phone receiver at me. I froze, afraid to ask. Well? She prompted. Don't you want to ask who? How many? How many books? I asked, starting slowly. 3, she said, with an option for 2 more. So I'm supposed to write 5 books about Lieutenant Randolph? No, only 3. If you can still do that, 2 more, and they get first rights to them. Terms. Your fee is 15%, which is pretty good. Not the best, but definitely above average for a newcomer. The first print run of Long Gone will be 250,000 copies. Your advance is 1/3 of the royalties from the first print run, with the balance of the royalties paid quarterly. And how much do they charge up front? $17 a book. I tried to do the math in my head, but couldn't. A little over 200,000 when you sign the contract, she said. The balance is paid as sales, exceed the first third of the original print run. Is that clear so far? I nodded. 200,000. Go for it, for goodness sake. Good, she continued. Then here's the best part. Your rate goes up to 18 for all copies, hardcover or paperback, over 500,000. That's very good, by the way. Of course, you can't make that much on trade paperbacks. They don't sell for that much, but it's still good money. The few percent didn't seem like much to me, but she was very excited. Now, she spoke, and the hoarseness disappeared from her voice. Here's the best part. The movie rights. You already have someone on them? Yep. We sold the option for $500,000, a percentage of the gross proceeds if the movie gets made. So I get $500,000 even if they don't make the movie? Bingo. When? As soon as you sign the contract. And when can I sign all this? As soon as you can get your ass to Miami, honey. I sat up, looking at Marisa but not seeing her. So please tell me it's almost ready, Tyler, Natalie said. No later than noon tomorrow, I said. I heard her sigh of relief. Great timing, kiddo. Can you come here the next day then? Sure. See you then? I closed my phone and stared at the ceiling. Good news? Asked Marisa. I looked at her and nodded. It's sold. She gave me a strained smile. Good, she said. Then let's get moving. You promised to have it done by noon tomorrow. I don't know what came over me. Maybe dizziness from everything that was happening. Whatever it was, I just leaned over, wrapped Marisa in my arms and hugged her tightly, nearly knocking her off the chair and sending us both to the floor. As I hugged her, I felt the tension fall from my body. I also felt her body grow tenser as we hugged. I'm sorry, I murmured in her ear, breaking the hug and looking at her in embarrassment. Never mind, she said, pulling away before looking at the manuscript. Where were we? We finished at 3 in the afternoon. Marisa emailed the finished manuscript to Natalie and then began tidying it up before wrapping it in rubber bands and tossing it, one last time, into her purse. Let's celebrate, I said. She looked at me, then shook her head. Come on, I prodded. Just one last dinner at the bar and grill. They have a new dessert. She held back, but I pushed on. Look, I said. I'm sure you're sick of me by now. You probably just want to get the hell out of here and have a real meal in some secluded corner of town. But we need to start a tradition here. A tradition, she said. A tradition, I repeated. You'll be the editor of all my books, if you have me, of course, and we'll always end the editing process with dinner at the bar and grill. Then you'll forget about me for 6 months or so until you have to come back, and I'll spend all that time writing another book. And then we'll start all over again. And we'll end up, again, at the bar and grill. Tradition, she repeated, and a smile creased the corners of her lips for only the second time since we'd met. Like a Thanksgiving turkey, I picked up on it. Santa Claus, she said. Exactly like that. You can't stray from tradition, I suppose, she said, even if it's just the beginning of one. Gotta start somewhere, I said. Now she was smiling with her full mouth with all her teeth. And it was a beautiful smile, if you could do without the black lipstick, of course. Should I call your girlfriend? I shook my head. No. She tilted her head. Why not? Because we're starting a tradition, I reasoned. I don't know if we'll be together next year when we do it again, but then we'll still have to invite her. Because of the whole tradition thing, Marisa said, and nodded in mock understanding. Exactly. Okay, she said, standing up and gathering the rest of her things from the table into her massive black bag. Pick me up at 5:30. Deal. At 5:45, we were sitting at the bar and grill. Marisa was devouring an appetizer of Thai-glazed chicken wings, and I was sipping a beer and watching her in amazement. What? She said, seeing me staring at her as she sucked the sauce from her long, slender fingers. I just don't understand how you eat so much, I said. And you're so, you're really good at keeping in shape. Skinny, she said, pushing her empty plate aside. You can say it. Skinny, skinny, beanpole. I know what I look like. I smiled. And how do you do that? I don't know, she replied. Just luck, I guess. So what do you do? I mean, I know you're in grad school and all, but what for? What for? Writing, she said. I love books. I mean, really, really, really love them. They are my passion, My whole raison d'etre. So you want to teach? Honestly, the thought of this goth-looking girl standing in front of a class of serious college students seemed a little far-fetched. Sure, I guess so. She smiled as the waitress brought our dinners. A Roadhouse burger with fries for her and a grilled chicken sandwich with fresh fruit for me. I'm sorry, but I can't eat like Marisa. In a week, I'll weigh 400 pounds. But I really want to write, she said with her mouth full of food. Books? Short stories? Poems? She shrugged. Probably not poems. It doesn't bother me that much. Short stories are good too, but you won't make enough to live on. So I guess I'll have to start with books. Any ideas? She shook her head, shoving down a pile of fries after the last sip of hamburger and washing it down with a swig of Bacardi and Coke. Need more experience, she said, finally swallowing. You know, life experience. What about your life experience? Okay, I was on a roll, getting her to open up and talk to me more than she had in the previous week and a half combined. It was okay to push. However, her look told me she didn't understand the question. Are you married? Engaged? Children? Any brothers or sisters? Where do you come from? You know. Tell me about Marisa Key. Not much to tell. Born and raised in Chicago, half-sister. Mom and dad divorced when I was 7. I've seen him about 10 times since then. Mom's a teacher, sister's a lawyer. Never been married or engaged, and I'm not dating anyone right now. I nodded. So your half-sister is a lawyer, I said, looking at her and noticing a faint resemblance. Not much, but there was one. Yes, your girlfriend is from Florida. Susan is my sister. Different fathers, same mother. I was stunned. Not surprisingly, Natalie laughed. Don't pout, Marisa said, seeing the emotion sweep across my face. So when did Susan say she knew the agent? She lied, Marisa admitted. I know the agent. But when she read your manuscript, she called me and said I should read it and try to find someone to look at it for you. She sent it to me and I read it. What can I say? She was right. It was incredible. And you called Natalie, I continued the story. Marisa nodded. I'd worked for her before. Told her I'd found a shiny new manuscript that needed an agent to promote. Brand new author. I had to beg and plead for a long time, but she agreed to read it if Susan could get it to her. And the rest is history, I concluded. Pretty much, yes, Marisa agreed. We finished our dinner in silence. I didn't know how to feel and wondered why I even cared. Tired of sulking? She said, pushing her plate away and then reaching for a piece of melon on my plate. I laughed. Nothing to sulk about, right? She shrugged. I mean, you did me a really big favor. I just wish I'd known about it sooner, I guess. What difference does it make? I wouldn't have backed out so quickly by making Natalie pay for the room. She shook her head. It's still a business. Always remember that. And your share? Do you get anything? She shrugged. Natalie will probably give me some kind of bonus. Not much, but at least something. What's in it for you, then? She smiled. You're kidding, right? I know it's no joy for my company. You've made that clear over the last 11 days. A chance to make sure another promising author gets a chance? She suggested. I shook my head. Fine, she acknowledged. Natalie has agreed to be my agent if I can write a book, and it doesn't cost a damn thing, okay? I nodded. Fair enough. So you know everything now, huh? I guess so. The waitress cleared away the dirty plates, and Marisa ordered a warm peach melba and a glass of Pinot Grigio to go with it. So how's Susan doing? I asked. She liked you, Marisa replied, finishing her Bacardi and Coke and glancing impatiently at the kitchen door where her dessert was being prepared. Very much so. Is she seeing anyone yet? Marisa turned to me again. Do you really care? What does that mean? She just made it sound like you two were just buddies, that's all. It wasn't my intention, I objected, feeling my anger rising. Jesus, Tyler, she said, making a grimace at my reaction. Chill out, dude. There's nothing wrong with that, even if you were. I'm just saying. Saying what? That she was just a convenient piece of ass? That's all I cared about? Hey, she said, calm down. I don't know how you felt or still feel about her, okay? I nodded, trying to calm down. Who's that in there? Said Marisa. Don't change the subject, I replied. It's just that she's been looking at you for the last 20 minutes, and I can't tell from her face if it's good or bad. I started to turn around, but Marisa's hand on my arm stopped me. Don't look, she said. She looks a lot like your girlfriend. What's her name? Allison. Yeah, hers. And she's with a boyfriend and a baby. My ex-wife, I said, with her new family. Marisa frowned at that, then picked up her spoon and took a bite of peach melba as it was placed in front of her. Do you want a bite? She said with a mouthful of peaches, ice cream, and raspberry puree. I shook my head, sipping my afternoon cup of strong black coffee in satisfaction. So this is her new husband? And their baby, I said, casting a quick glance to make sure it was really Christine. She looked at me, as did Randy, who seemed to be mortified by everything that was going on. Christine turned away, and Randy continued to stare. Marisa said something that I didn't catch, stuffing my mouth full of food. What? She swallowed, took a sip of wine, then said in a low voice. I said it wasn't his baby. What do you mean saying it's not his baby? Of course it's not his. That's why she left. To move here, continue her affair with him, get knocked up by him, and start a new family. When was the baby born? Does it matter? Because there's no way it could be his baby, she said, looking into my eyes. There was a tinge of fear in them, or maybe sadness, and I didn't know what had gotten into her. It's his, I repeated. Look at him, Tyler. Probably 5'6" tall, strong build, black hair and swarthy skin. Look at the kid. He's big. I think he's about a year old, but he's big even for a baby. She's not as big as your ex, and the baby has the blondest hair and the bluest eyes I've ever seen. Christ, they're 15 feet away from me and I can see the blue in those eyes. So what are you saying? Said I, knowing exactly what she meant. You do have light brown hair, she said, sipping her wine and looking over my shoulder at Christine's desk. And I'm willing to bet you were blonde when you were a kid. A real blonde. It's not mine, I said. And you have blue eyes too. Really big ones. And your skin is light-colored, not dark like what's his name. He's not my baby, I whispered, my voice becoming hoarse as I counted the months in my head. Then when was he born? I shrugged. I don't know. She nodded. You might want to find out, she said, pushing aside the unfinished dessert and finishing the rest of the wine. We left without saying a word to each other. And I could feel Christine's eyes burning holes in my back as we walked past them. Part 2. It's a simple question, I said to Allison. Her eyes didn't meet mine, however, and that gave me an answer. How long have you two known each other? She wrinkled her nose. How long? I said, my voice getting louder. It became obvious about 6 months ago, she muttered. When was he born? Allie threw me a look of irrelevance. The date of his birth, I said. When was that? August 17th of last year, she said. I counted in my mind. Yes, it was entirely possible. Christine had been visiting her in-laws for most of December of that year, the last month of our marriage, and she had probably been having fun with Randy the entire time. Still, it was entirely possible that the boy was mine. Why didn't you tell me anything about this? Tears showed in Allie's eyes. I'm so sorry, she whispered. I should have said something. I know I should have. But I don't know. She's really afraid you'll do something, that's all. And she's my cousin. Which makes me what? Your piece of ass that you don't owe allegiance to? Just a dumb bastard you can keep in the dark? No, she screamed. I love you, Tyler. I've always loved you. But she's my cousin. We're close. You know that. She was right. They were close. But that didn't matter to me. If her loyalties were broken, she had to tell me so. Please say you forgive me, Allie begged, tears streaming down her face as she reached for me and tried to pull me to her. I held her back. What did Christine tell you? I demanded. She doesn't know, Allie said. She's afraid. Afraid your father will find out and do something. Afraid Randy will find out and leave her. Why should he care? He knew what he was risking when he married her when she was pregnant with a child that could have been mine. Because she can't have any more children, Allie said, snorting as the tears subsided and her face took on a sad look. There were complications. When Ben was born, she had to have her tubes tied. And Randy wanted kids, 2 or 3. If he found out this one wasn't even his, well, it won't be good. I nodded. Christine could be in a complete mess. She could lose her new love because of the mess she'd gotten us all into. I stood up and walked to the door. Please don't go, Tyler. Please. I stopped at the door, putting my hand on the doorknob. Please, she continued to beg, her sobs getting louder and more insistent. I opened the door and left without looking back. Early the next morning, I flew to Florida. Susan met me at the gate and gave me a big hug. I thought you'd be happy to see me, she whispered in my ear. I'm sorry, I said, forcing myself to smile. Something came up. She nodded. Marisa told me. My eyes narrowed. What exactly? Just that you might have a son you knew nothing about. I nodded. Come on. We can talk in the car. She smiled and took my hand, dragging me behind her to the parking lot and her car. So what should I do? I said as we drove down the road. About what? About my son. What do you want to do? I thought about it for a moment. Such a deceptively simple question, but it's really the crux of the matter, and it's a lot harder to answer than one might think. I guess I want to find out if he's even mine. Good idea. And how am I supposed to do that? Well, she said, looking at the road but biting her lip in thought, I suppose you file a paternity suit in Illinois, or you'll file a Florida divorce case there and reopen it. I nodded. Not really my thing, Susan continued. Never been divorced or anything. I sighed, realizing what I had to do. I'll call a few people we know in Chicago, Susan said, reading my mind. We'll see who they recommend for cases like this. Thanks, I said, looking out at the scenery. We drove the rest of the way to Natalie's office in silence. So, this is the great Tyler Collins, a petite 60-year-old woman with flawless makeup, copious amounts of jewelry, and impeccable business suit, and a deep, raspy voice muttered as I walked into the lobby with Susan. And you're Natalie, I said, extending my hand. Oh no, sweetie, she said, drawing my hand to hers and enclosing me in a hug. I don't get to cuddle with good-looking men very often these days. I'm not going to let this go to waste. She hugged me, and I could smell the smoke from a million cigarettes in her pores and clothes. I hugged her back. You're just as handsome as Susan, Natalie said, breaking the hug. Maybe even better. I smiled. It wasn't often that a 60-year-old chick hit on me in the presence of a former lover and a leggy 20-something secretary with a Playboy rack. The secretary, however, simply ignored Natalie, apparently accustomed to such displays of affection. Susan only laughed. Well, Natalie said, looking me over from head to toe. Contracts? I asked. Good, she replied, with feigned disappointment in her voice. Hell, she was practically rubbing her hands together with joy at the thought of what we had to sign. The three of us made our way to the conference room. Natalie invited Susan and me to sit in the neighboring chairs, and she herself sat down across from us. Here you go, she said, opening a folder and pulling out thick documents with sign here labels on them. She held them out to me across the table. Have you seen these? I asked Susan. She nodded. They're fine. Good, I said. and spent the next 10 minutes flipping through the various documents while Susan explained the terms of the documents I was signing. "Were you even listening to me?" said Susan when I was done. "Not really." She frowned, and I turned to Natalie. "Are those the terms you told me on the phone?" "Of course," Natalie said. "And those are good terms for an aspiring author?" "Excellent conditions." "Then what's there to worry about?" I said to Natalie. "You both have my back, and I'm free to figure out how to give them another book." "Within 6 months," Susan said. My eyes went wide. "Is it out there somewhere?" She threw up her hands in despair at my nonchalance. "How far along are you?" asked Natalie. "Almost finished sketching." She nodded. "Shouldn't be a problem then, right?" I smiled. "No, I'll get it all done." We spent the next hour discussing other technical details I didn't care deeply about. We had to discuss the book tour, talk show appearances if everything went right, which authors would read the book and make nice comments for the dust jacket, cover, illustrations, and all sorts of arcane things about the book. Most of the time, I nodded and agreed with Natalie's suggestions. Then, before I knew it, the meeting was over, and Susan and I were back in her car and headed somewhere for lunch. "Okay," she finally said, as the waitress took our drink orders and left us alone. "Good what?" said I, not taking my eyes off the endless ocean outside the windows. "As I understand it, you can play this game 3 ways." "Play what exactly 3 ways?" "You can do nothing," she said. "Just always wonder if he's your son." I glared at her, not wanting to discuss what had been swirling around in my head since Marisa had first suggested the possibility, and Allie had pretty much confirmed it. "Or," Susan continued, ignoring my gaze, "you could sue, have a paternity test done, and if he's yours, get visitation rights and child support. The child support, by the way, will be considerable, considering all the papers you just signed." I started to protest that money didn't matter that much, but she managed to finish her sentence before I could utter more than the first syllable. "Or you could do a paternity test and, if it's yours, do nothing. Maybe she'll just agree." I shook my head. "That option is definitely out." "Why?" "Because I can't know I have a son and just leave it at that. You know, just leave him to her and that bastard." She nodded. "So what's it going to be?" "It's not that simple," I said, my voice sounding louder than I expected. "Yes, it is," Susan said. "It's very simple, Tyler. You either leave it as it is and always wonder, or you figure it out and deal with it as soon as you find out. A or B. Which do you choose?" I hesitated, looking out at the ocean and realizing she was right. "Well," she said as the waitress brought the drinks. "B," I said. "It's B. I should know." She nodded, smiling at that. "Good boy." Then she opened her cell phone and called the office. "Yes, it's me," she said, when the other end answered. "Call our Chicago office and give me some family law referrals for a second." She closed the speaker and looked at me. "What county are you in?" "Lincoln." "Lincoln County, Illinois," she said into the receiver. "Try to hurry and call me with names and phone numbers as soon as you have them." "Okay." "Sure. Thanks." She closed the receiver. "Now," she said, spreading the napkin on her lap, "can we relax and enjoy our lunch?" We did, and I took comfort in the fact that something was being done. By the time I was boarding the plane 3 hours later, I had the names of 3 attorneys in my pocket and an appointment for the next day with the only Grant City attorney on the list. "Take care, Mr. Best-Selling Author," Susan said, leaning over and chastely smacking me on the cheek. "You too, hot Florida legal eagle," I replied, hugging her tightly and realizing that our relationship would now forever be an attorney-client relationship. "So," James McNally said, raising his eyes from my Florida divorce decree and fixing his gaze on me, "you think this boy she has with Walters now could be yours?" I nodded. "Based on what?" "He was definitely conceived while we were still married," I said. "You were living apart?" I shook my head. "It was about 2 or 3 weeks later." He nodded. "And you had Uh, relationship with her during that time? Once, I said. And with Walters? I shrugged. Not the slightest clue. Was there any chance they were together? I'd bet on it. She was here for a few weeks around that time. And they were married by the time the boy was born? I nodded. When you saw her at the divorce hearing, was she wearing makeup? I thought she'd just put on some weight. He nodded, looking at me while his mind went over all the legalities that needed to be considered. Is there anything else? He asked. He looks like me, I said. Light skin, blonde hair, blue eyes. And Randy? Yeah, I said. Nothing like that. Neither is Christine, except for the blue eyes. She has bottle hair, and she's darker. Good, he said, leaning forward. Have you thought this through? Completely. You realize you could pay a lot of child support, especially now that there's a book involved? I don't care, I said, angry that everyone seemed to think it was all about the money. Calm down, he said. My job is to explain all aspects of the situation to you. You make a decision, but damn it, it has to be an informed one, okay? Okay, just do it. He smiled. It was a bright smile, showing off perfect teeth and emphasizing the dimple in his chin. The movie star smile of a lawyer in his early 40s, still possessing movie star looks. Are you a shark? I asked, not trusting just the looks. When I need to be, he replied. Meaning? Meaning, you don't always need a shark. Sometimes you need a negotiator. I shook my head. Not with her. With Christine, I need a shark. No. We'll see how things play out and deal with it as we go, okay? I wasn't sure, but he looked confident. Let's find out if he's your son before we do anything else, okay? That made sense, and I relaxed. Deal. Good, he said. We spent the next 20 minutes discussing the terms of representation, anticipated costs, and gathering the information he needed to file a lawsuit. When we were done, he looked at me. Let's not sit around, he said. I can have this ready tomorrow morning for you to sign. Stop by my place around 8, and I'll file it with the court. My look almost didn't hide my surprise, and he laughed, noticing my reaction. It's really just a few simple documents to get you started, he said. The more serious cases will only begin when we serve them with subpoenas and get them into court. Them? I asked. Randy and Christine, he said. They should both be named as defendants because they're married, because the boy was born during the marriage, and because Randy's name is undoubtedly on the birth certificate. I didn't understand that, but it made a certain amount of sense. Still, suing the local cop over the paternity of a child he considered his. Own flesh and blood wasn't much fun. Until this was over, there was no speeding in the slightest. And you don't mind? I asked. Suing the local cop and all that? He shrugged. Why should I mind? He won't do anything to me. Or you, really. If he does, you let me know, and I'll deal with it, okay? Fair enough. The next morning at 5:08, I stopped by McNally's law office. It took me only 3 minutes to review the complaint and sign it. Sunday morning, 2 days later, Christine and Randy received the lawsuit. It was 10:30, and I was sitting in my room, revising the finished sketch to make it darker and more violent. After 11 days of working with Marisa, things were coming together faster than the first time. Take my newfound knowledge of building tension and combine it with a new damn crisis in my life, again caused by Christine, the goddamn love of my damn life. And the sketch was getting darker by the minute. You bastard! I heard Christine shout from somewhere outside. A knock on the door and more obscenities followed. I saved my outline and backed up, then went downstairs to answer the door. Dad beat me to it. Will you calm down? He was telling her. There was nothing she could do about it. He's trying to ruin me, she screamed. My marriage! Just because I left him for Randy. He never got over it, and now he's trying to ruin me. Bullshit, her father rumbled, and she froze in fear. No one, especially her own father, had ever spoken to her like that, and she didn't know how to handle it. I stopped at the top of the stairs to observe her. He's trying to find out if you stole his son from him, my father continued, trying to contain his anger. My grandson. That's what he's trying to find out, and you damn well know it. But he has no right to. Like hell he doesn't have the right, Dad rumbled again, as angry as I'd ever seen him. If that's his boy, if that's my grandson, he has every damn right in the world to know that, and to be a father to him. Shock froze permanently on Christine's face. Her mouth moved, but no words came out. And you, Christine, Father said, pointing a finger at her face. You had no damn right to keep this from him. You know that. So don't come in here and yell that Tyler did something wrong, because we both know that's bullshit. You're just mad that this perfect little world you've created for yourself, a world based on lies and your own damn selfish needs, you're just mad that this perfect world is about to explode on you. Her eyes found me at the top of the stairs, and her face begged me to save her from her father. I only raised an eyebrow in response. Is he wrong? I asked, walking down the stairs. Are you sure this boy belongs to Randy? When she didn't answer anything, I pounced on her. You know damn well Ben could be my son. You've already shared that with Allie. Her face reflected horror at the realization that Allie had blabbed. Oh, don't worry, I said, sarcasm evident in every word. Your precious family didn't snitch on you until I got Allie to confess. But, Tyler, she stammered, whispering, shifting her gaze from Dad to me and back again, not sure how to handle two men. Not one, but two, talking to her like that. And you've suspected it for over 6 months, I continued. 6 months, and you haven't said a damned word. But the doctor, she protested. He said that babies don't turn dark. Their pigment doesn't show up until they're a year old or more. And he's a year old now, I objected. He hasn't darkened one bit, has he? Her face told me the answer. It also told me that she had realized the same thing a long time ago. I wondered how many nights she'd spent in bed over the past year praying that Ben would be only a shade darker the next morning and his hair would go from blonde to brown. So were you ever going to tell me? No, she whispered, lowering her face to the floor. Just hoped and prayed he'd never find out? Her father cut in, his disgust at the idea evident in every word. Yes, she replied, unable to look either of us in the eye. And now you're angry that he found out, Father said, waved his hand in disgust, turned and walked away. Haven't you done enough for him for one life? Are you also trying to steal his son? I didn't say anything, just watched my father walk off into another room, then came back and looked at a fidgeting Christine. Have a seat, I said, waving my hand toward the couch and chair. She stepped over and sank down on the couch, resting her head in her lap and saying nothing. Can you tell me what I did that was so bad? Said I, sitting down across from her and leaning over. I mean, I loved you more than life itself, and you did. In return, you dumped me without a word, without even an explanation. Jesus, you blew me off, dumped me, moved here, and you can't even tell me what I did that was so bad? What did I do to deserve this kind of shit? Nothing, she muttered. It wasn't you. Then, I continued, already gaining strength, I find out from Mom and Dad that you're getting married before the ink is even dry on the divorce papers, and that you're pregnant, and that you've been having fun with him all this time, while we were married. Did I deserve that? Your what? Your utter contempt? Was I really that bad? She started to speak, but I didn't let her finish. So, I hissed, my editor has dinner with me to celebrate the completion of my first novel, and she's the one who has to point out to me that your son is probably mine and not Randy's. And then Allie confirms that you've had the same thoughts for months, but you were afraid I'd find out? She looked at me. Misery contorted her face. What, Christine? Tell me, what the hell did I ever do to you? I never cheated on you. I busted my ass to give you everything you ever wanted. You weren't there for me, she sobbed, tears trickling down her cheeks. I was all alone, didn't know a soul, And you were gone all the time. That's what. I was lonely. And then when I came home, I wasn't lonely anymore. And you wouldn't listen. You wouldn't slow down. You. Bullshit, I rumbled, making her recoil back and wrap herself up. I just didn't kiss your ass every time you demanded it. You knew how. Much work I'd have to do before we moved there. You knew how much I'd have to keep earning when you wanted your perfect house, and your shopping, and those damn designer handbags for your mother and Scylla for Christmas, and golf clubs for your old man. You could have gotten a job or made friends or done something to help us, but you wanted to get all that without having to work for it. Without me having to work, so I could always be there to take care of you. You wanted $1,000,000 dropped in my lap, so you could have all your shit and I could sit at home, tell you how much I love you, and keep you company. So grow the screw up, Christine. Life doesn't work that way. She was openly crying now, and for some reason I felt better. I'd already been agonizing over her for God knows how long, and now I wanted to take some of that pain out on her. So how are you doing, Christine? Is Randy always around, or are the midnight shifts starting to wear you down? And how's that crappy 2-bedroom apartment handling your growing family? The look on her face told me I'd hit a nerve. She'd screwed up and she knew it. Now she knew I knew it too. What's worse, Christine? I asked, leaning in. Never seeing your husband but having all the shit you can afford, or never seeing your husband living in a crappy little apartment and buying clothes at the Salvation Army? At least I have a family now, she shouted back. And my son. Not for long, I warned. And not long if I have anything to do with it. You won't, she gasped, horror distorting her features. You won't take Ben away from me. He doesn't even know you. And whose fault is that? I replied. And how do you think a judge is going to look at that? You're hiding my own son from me? Don't even think about it, she hissed. You're never taking my son. What about Randy? I continued. How will he take it when he finds out Ben isn't his? I mean, you won't be able to have any more kids and all that. Screw you, she hissed. Been there, done that, I said, getting up and walking to the door. And now that I've done it to others, you should know it wasn't so great. Her jaw dropped, stunned that someone could talk to Daddy's little princess like that. I opened the door and held it for her. I'll see you in court, Christine, I said. Both you and Randy. She slung her purse over her shoulder and whizzed past me without another word. She got into her car, slammed the door, and pulled out of the driveway without looking back. I was suddenly glad I'd been such a jerk, and sad that she was going to do everything she could to separate me from my son. The confusion bubbling in my insides was reflected in an updated sketch that was finished 2 days later. Chapter 12. It's a funny thing about writing. The more you write, the easier it is. You write faster and better, with fewer mistakes and revisions. This was especially true for my second book in the series. Heck, I knew the main characters so well that putting words in their mouths was a matter of second nature. Since the action took place only 40 miles from my home, in Rockford, Illinois, a town I'd been to 1,000,000 times, it was easier for me to visualize the landscape and mood, the weather, and the battered, abandoned industrial buildings. It also helped that I was devoting 12 hours a day to writing. I got up at 6 every morning, worked in the workshop from 7 to 11, and then wrote until I passed out from exhaustion at midnight or so. The pages filled in on themselves, and I was almost halfway through the draft by the time my first court hearing took place a month or so after Christine confronted me and Dad. Sitting in the crowded courtroom, I wondered if anything was getting done in court at all. The benches on the gallery were packed with angry, somber people going through a divorce. On the huge platform in front of the judge's bench, a crowd of attorneys shuffled their papers, feverishly scribbled orders for the judge's signature, and quietly whispered final attempts at settlement. Every 3 or 4 minutes, another pair of attorneys, those in the long line waiting for an opportunity to approach, would receive the judge's invitation to rise. She was in her mid-60s, and the boredom of it all was written all over her haggard face and sluggish movements. After 20 minutes of sitting in the cramped gallery, I saw James McNally stand at the end of the line, whispering with two other attorneys. When the case before them was over, he found me with his eyes and invited me forward. Collins v. Collins, now known as Walters, Judge Gluth said as I approached. Good morning, Your Honor, McNally said. James McNally represents the plaintiff, Mr. Collins, who is present here and is to my left. Sandra Petrowski for Mrs. Walters, said a low, scruffy woman. Mrs. Walters is approaching. I turned and saw Christine squeezing between the people crowding the gallery and Randy casting a glance at her as he walked forward from the corner of the jury box where he sat. And Robert Hall for Mr. Walters, said a short, middle-aged lawyer. And what are we here for, ladies and gentlemen? Said Judge Gluth. The lawyers looked at each other, and the other two nodded to McNally. My client was married to Mrs. Walters, he said, switching easily to a conversational tone. Their marriage was dissolved in Florida about 18 months ago. We now wish to enter that judgment into evidence and reopen the case. Judge Gluth waved her hand, ordering him to get to the point. Now, Judge, he continued, Mrs. Walters gave birth to a son about a year ago. And you're just now getting around to assigning child support? She asked. Actually, McNally said, we're not even sure the child belongs to my client, so we'd like to enter a judgment into the case and get an order for DNA testing to determine parentage. Judge Gluth reacted as if she had just heard McNally recite her shopping list. No reaction, and I mean no reaction. Miss Petrowski? She said, looking at Christine's attorney. Obviously, we're challenging their right to request such a paternity test, Petrowski said. Obviously, the judge said. She turned to the remaining attorney. Mr. Hall? He glanced at Randy, who only nodded in response. Well, Your Honor, he said, turning to the judge again. My client agrees to be tested. Yes, he does, doesn't he? She said, catching the look Christine threw Randy and directing it at me, and then back at Randy. Judge Gluth pursed her lips and looked at the three of us in turn. Is there any reason why I shouldn't grant the request? Addressed Judge Gluth to Petrowski. Well, she began. Let me cut to the chase, the judge interrupted. Is there a scientific probability that Mr. Collins is the father of this child? Petrowski paused, then looked at Christine, looking for concessions. You want me to ask your client in open court? Said Judge Gluth, leaning over the bench and speaking more softly. Perhaps in more explicit terms. Christine lowered her head. No, Your Honor, Petrowski said, seeing Christine's shoulders tense. We agree to the recording of the court order and for the mother and child to undergo a DNA test. Good, Judge Gluth said, leaning back in his chair. Prepare me an order. We all nodded and stepped back. What just happened in there? I asked McNally as we stood outside the courtroom. Randy straight up freaked out. That's what happened, McNally replied. You mean? He nodded. She told him she hadn't done it with you in months. There's no way it could be your kid. And now that she's been forced to confess, I began. Trouble in Pleasantville, he concluded. I laughed. What's funny? Said Walters from behind my shoulder. I turned around. He stood there with his fists clenched, anger boiling in his clenched fists and jaw and in the veins on his temples. What's wrong, Randy? Surprised she lied? Surprised that the wife, my wife, that you slept with lied to you too? Guys, Hall said, stepping between us. Calm down, McNally added, his hand squeezing my shoulder like a vice. And what are you going to do if Ben is my son? I continued, leaning over Hall's shoulder and gazing into Randy's face. You're going to leave her? The love of your life? His jaws moved back and forth, and his eyes spewed pure venom, but he said nothing. Yeah, that's exactly what I thought, I said. Not the slightest clue. Welcome to the goddamn club. I turned to McNally again, nodded, and walked away. So what the hell is so special about Christine? What does she have that turns men to mush, makes them shut up, put up with her crap, and apologize when she's angry because she's been accused of doing something wrong? Well, the way she looks, of course. That looks alone would make most men shudder, and she would mold them into whatever she wanted. But she's got something else. She looks at men like we're her only ones. I know. She's met me with that look a million times. Sometimes to bend my will, sometimes to avoid my wrath, and sometimes just because she wanted to make me happy. Add to that the fact that she's smart, talkative, and fun, and you have pretty much the complete package. Her only flaw is that she was a spoiled brat who grew into a willful, spoiled adult who isn't used to being rejected. If Christine wanted something, she damn well better get it, or else she'd have to pay the price. And yet, in all the years we've been together, I've never suspected for a second that she'd just drop me like a sack of potatoes to get her way. Poor old Randy, on the other hand, certainly should have suspected that trait in her. After all, he was only 3 years older than us. He'd known us both all our lives, albeit from afar. He knew, of course, that she was married when she started flying home and making eyes at him. And he knew she didn't hesitate to cheat, sulk, and do whatever she wanted. Oh no, he definitely knew all that. Honestly, I felt sorry for the poor bastard. Sure, he'd played his part in ruining my marriage. But it was Christine who had dealt the cards, not Randy. Christine owed me honesty, loyalty, and all that crap. Not Randy. And frankly, if the roles had been reversed, I'm not sure how I would have handled it. Let's cut to the chase. We can all hold our heads high and talk about how right we would do the right thing if given the opportunity. But it's another thing entirely when you're single. Such an incredible beauty offers herself, and that beauty's husband is 1,000 miles away. Still, I was thrilled that Randy was going through what I was going through right now. Hell, he wasn't worried enough as it was. After all, they'd only been having fun for 2 years or so. Let her do it with you in 12 years, even though you're married to her. I was with her for damn ages, and she left me without even thinking. And I was so much better, prettier, and made a lot more money than that little toad. So accept it, Randy. Chapter 13. Dad and I were both in rehab. I went there 3 times a week for an hour or so, and Mom's progress was slow, but sure. Dad was there every day for 5 or 6 hours a day helping with therapy, and he was still impatient with her progress. She's ready to go home, the doctor said again. But she can barely speak, Dad protested again. It will take time, patience, and lots of practice, said the doctor. Is she walking? I asked. Will she improve? He nodded. Look, he said, it's not like we're just going to send her home and that's it. She's going to have physical therapy 5 days a week. They'll come to her home for an hour a day Monday through Friday. And 3 days a week she will have speech therapy with her. The pathologist will work with all of you. With her, so she can continue to improve her speech, and with you, so you can practice with her and such. Then why can't she just stay here? I asked. Because the insurance company won't allow it, he said. It's gotten to the point where it's cheaper to have it happen in your house. Based on what? Objected Dad. She won't get as much therapy at home. Actually, yes, the doctor said, pressing his lips together as he was bored with this conversation. She'll get the same amount of time a week with a therapist as she gets now. You've seen it, Mr. Collins. You're the one helping her with exercises and stuff, not the therapist. But we don't have the things we need for that at home, Dad continued. The insurance company will pay for the rent and installation of all of this stuff, the doctor explained. You'll have everything you need. What if I just pay for her to stay here? Said I. The doctor looked at me like I was crazy and didn't know what I was talking about. I have more than enough money to pay for her to stay here, I said. But he only shook his head. You're wasting your money. Honestly, she should have been discharged home a week ago. Why? The environment, the doctor continued. She feels more familiar and comfortable in her home. Once you get her there, the pace of her recovery will pick up quite rapidly, faster than here. As long as you both do everything the physical therapist and speech therapist tell you to do. And I mean everything. If anything, do too much. I looked at Daddy, who didn't look convinced, then back at the doctor. What if her recovery goes south? One of them will tell us, and we'll assess the best course of action, he said. He paused, looking at both of us. He sighed, but his face softened. He'd been through this with hundreds of unbelieving families before us. Listen, he said. Trust me. You'll see for yourself. I know it's hard to believe, but she's really progressing fast. And we expect her to regain speech and almost full use of her right side. There will be residuals of the paralysis that will never go away, mostly in facial muscles and grip strength. But she's really doing much better than any of us realized. Okay, Dad said. We'll give it a try. So, when does she get discharged? I asked. Saturday, he said. But that's only in 2 days, Dad finished for me. We've already got the equipment you'll need ready to be delivered tomorrow. Can anyone be there between 9 and noon? I can, I said. He nodded. Good. Then let's get on it. The next morning at 9:30, the doorbell rang. Good morning, Tyler, said a smiling, pot-bellied Denny Koss. Denny, I said, shaking his hand. What are you doing here? Labor, he said, looking around the living room over my shoulder. And you're not ready for it. I can see that now. How much is there? I asked. A lot. He brushed past me into the house. We're going to have a lot to clean up, he said, then turned, his face lighting up with a cherubic smile. By the way, how are you doing? I'm fine, Danny, I smiled back. It's good to see you. It's good to see you too. You've been back for a while now. I know. Seen you around here a couple times. Been busy, I explained. Yeah, he said, his face turning serious. Tough case with your mom. Great woman. Thanks. He nodded, then turned, picked up one end of the coffee table and nodded for me to take the other end. Let's take all this stuff to the side for now, he said. Once we set everything up, we'll see what stays and what goes to the basement, okay? Do you always do that? No, he said, lifting his end of the solid walnut table as if it were a feather. But you've been my protector. A special bond, you know, between a center and his quarterback. I mean, how many times a game did you cover me? How many games a season? He winked, setting the table down. You're learning to get attached to your quarterback. I laughed. Well, it's been a nice experience. Yeah, he said, lifting his end of the couch. But you could have bought me dinner or something. But no, just touch me and go. The rest of the moving session went the same way, us laughing and talking about school and what we'd been up to since. I was amazed and even a little ashamed to learn that chubby little Danny Koss was no ordinary movers. Hell no, he was the owner of the company. He'd insisted on this delivery when he saw the address, and he purposely didn't bring an assistant with him, hoping I'd come to his rescue and we could chat about the good old days. Why don't you ever show up? He asked as we settled into a chair and took a breather after moving all the equipment from his truck into the house. I shrugged. Been busy, I guess. You know, living in Florida, trying to make a life there and stuff. And you? He asked. Did you succeed in all that? Sure. And all it cost me was my marriage. So I guess you got what you wanted and it bit you in the ass, huh? Strong, I agreed. Sucks. Yeah. We spent the next half hour setting up the hospital bed and all the gadgets associated with physical therapy. Then another hour was spent rearranging the living room furniture and moving some of it to the basement. Oh well, Danny said, wiping his hands on his jeans. It'll do for the first time. I looked around the room, then nodded. Yeah, that should be enough. You know, he said, turning around and giving me a level look. Friday night we're getting together. From high school and a few people we're friends with who live here now. I nodded. Anyway, he continued, seeing that I was listening expectantly. It's going to be at our house tonight, around 6:30 or 7. I know they'll all be happy to see you. Has Christine ever been there? I asked. A few times, he nodded, his smile turning grim. Not often, but sometimes. I wondered about that. We lived in the same town, knew the same people. I couldn't let her drive me away. So what should I bring? I said. He grinned. An appetizer and whatever you're going to drink. Deal, I said, shaking his hand and trying to gain 100 in the process. He shook it back in an iron grip, then looked at his own hand when the shake broke. No way, he said, placing the bill on the hospital bed. I covered your ass in high school. I still do now. Then invite your wife and kids over for dinner, I suggested. I owe you a lot of dinners, don't I? He only laughed. No way. You're not getting rid of all those quick feelings for a lousy $1,000. I want to be wined and dined. We laughed together, and he left. I quit writing at 6 and started getting ready for the party at Denny's house. 45 minutes later, dressed in jeans and a long-sleeved white shirt whose cuffs were rolled up to mid-forearm, I pulled up to Denny's house in a new neighborhood on the outskirts of Grant City. About 10 cars were already parked in the driveway and along the curbs, and I could hear laughter and conversation coming from the back seat as I grabbed a case of Light and a tray of hummus and pita chips from the back seat. As I turned the corner of the house and headed toward the large terrace where everyone was gathered, I was greeted by a chorus of Tylers, hey dudes, and partners. Hey, Tyler, Danny Dee petite wife said, giving me a peck on the cheek and taking the hummus tray from my hands. There's some beer in the fridge over there. I nodded. Thanks for having us over. Thanks for coming, she replied, looking like she was genuinely happy to see me. She had graduated 3 or 4 years later than us, and all I remembered of her was a tiny child with short, boyish facial features. She was still small, much smaller than Danny, that's for sure, but her facial features were cute, like a pixie. She had definitely grown into a fine lady. Stay away from her, Danny shouted from the group of guys, interrupting my observations. I waved him off with a chuckle and started pouring beers from the drawer into the cooler with ice. Leaving one behind, I opened it, took a sip, and walked over to Danny and his group. It felt like a high school party, but at the same time it wasn't. Among the 35 or so people were guys and girls we'd gone to school with, but there were younger and older faces as well. Some I recognized, by face or name, from growing up in Grant City. Some were from other parts of the country and now called Grant City their home. We chatted for a while, getting to know each other anew and figuring out who was married, divorced, had kids, owned businesses, worked for others, and so on. I had been there for about an hour when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Hey, Tyler. I tensed up, realizing it was a distinct possibility. Forcing myself to smile, I turned around. Hey, Christine. The group I was talking to recoiled from us and lowered their voices to hurried whispers and cast glances. Have you gotten to the clinic yet? Gave them your DNA? I shook my head. Next Friday. It's yours, she said, her eyes sad. I narrowed my eyes, not realizing what game she was playing right now. Can we talk for a few minutes? She said. Somewhere less public? After a moment, I nodded, then turned and walked into the house. We settled on the couch in the living room, closing the door behind us. I didn't know, she began, dropping her eyes to the floor. But you knew it was possible. She nodded. And when you suspected, you didn't tell me. She looked up at me, her gaze blank. Have you ever had dreams? She asked, addressing me almost to herself. Because I used to have them. All the time. And sometimes, if I was lucky, dreams came true. But then you find out that those dreams aren't really dreams at all. She turned to face me, her eyes focused on mine. So what did you dream, Christine? Because I can tell you what mine was like. The same as yours, she said. To be with you always, always. To have a family. Never worrying about money and bills and stuff. To live in a big house and have a big family. Ward and June Cleaver, I said. She nodded. Ward and June Cleaver, she agreed. And just when we almost had everything, I said, you left me. For him. She looked at the floor again and muttered something. What? Said I, leaning closer. I said I didn't leave you for him. For Randy's sake. I left you for my dream. She lifted her head, her eyes begging me to understand. I didn't think I'd get my dream with you. I didn't think we'd ever have a family, and Well, everything. I thought you'd just keep working 100 hours a week and I'd be stuck in this house all alone. And when did you start coming back here? I asked. Scylla told me that I didn't belong in Florida, that you were being selfish, keeping me in the house all day and keeping me from starting a family. I nodded. I knew her sister had played no small part in that. And my family, she continued. Mom and Dad. They told me how much they missed me and how much I needed to start giving them grandchildren and stuff. We needed to come back. You never once suggested we sell the house and move back here, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I know. But would you have offered? Would you have done it? I shrugged. I guess we'll never know now. We were silent for a few moments, and then a thought occurred to me. You know, I said half to myself, as soon as I found out Mom had a stroke and Dad needed help, I immediately sold everything and came here. So I guess we know, don't we? If you'd come to me, I'd probably move back here. She nodded. That's what I thought. Then why? She thought for a moment before answering. I guess I just figured you didn't really love me anymore. Based on what? I don't know. You've been working so hard. You weren't listening to me as much, spending more time at home and stuff. And when you got here, I said, Randy listened to every word and movement you made. She sighed, which was answer enough. And now? I asked. He's already filed for divorce. I got it yesterday. Why? I mean, it's a bit rushed, don't you think? He says he feels humiliated. I lied to him. Let him think Ben was his and everything. And he told everyone else, the people he works with, friends, family, and all that. And now he has to tell them all that Ben isn't his, that he's yours. Again, we sat in silence for a few minutes. I could see she wanted to say something, but she looked thoughtful. Go ahead, I said softly. Ask anything you want. She shook her head, and I put my hand over hers and squeezed. Why Allie? She asked. Is it to get back at me? I chuckled inwardly. No, not everything is up to you, Christine. I paused, contemplating why I was with Allie. Well, I think it's partly down to you. Why? You ask? Because she was available, and I was comfortable with her, and I was drawn to her. Partly, I suppose, because she reminded me so much of you. But no, I didn't spend time with her to get back at her or to hurt you. A year ago? Yes, that would have been a possibility. But now? No. And you're going to give her another chance? She asked, her face telling me she hoped not. No, I'm pretty sure that ship has sailed. Is it because of me? Because of her keeping my secret? Yes and no. No, it's not because of you. Yes, because she should have told me. If she loved me the way she said she did, she couldn't have kept any such thing from me. And I'm sure she would have taken it with her to her grave. It's not her fault, Christine protested. No, it is her fault. She made her bed. Well? What? Can we be friends again, Tyler? I mulled it over. I don't know. Will you ever be able to forgive me? I paused, confused by the cues I sounded. What are you looking for here, Christine? She looked into my eyes, trying to smile and failing miserably. Are you thinking about getting back together? Her nod was so slight I almost missed it. My eyes widened, and I felt my jaw drop at what she was suggesting. We're here again, she said. Back home. And now we have a baby boy together. If you can forgive me, well, I'll listen better. Appreciate you the way I always should have. I felt her hand squeeze mine in response. Soft, warm skin, so familiar on mine, a gentle caress. Say something, she whispered. At least say you'll think about it. I could only nod. Okay, time out to explain what was going on in my stupefied brain. 2 years ago, the love of my life ran away without any explanation. She married another guy, the guy she was having fun with while she was married to me, and had a baby. Now I find out, one, that the baby is most likely, because I don't take her word for it yet, mine, and 2, that hubby number 2 dumped her, and she's single again. And now I find out that she doesn't hate me. She hates herself for leaving, even if her self-loathing is only her own misery, and she might want to get back together. So what do? Do you tell her to back off? Easy to say if she hasn't been the love of your life. It's even harder when you add our probable child together and having to interact one way or another for the next 17 years and wanting to give little Ben a solid family life and proper upbringing. Are you saying, yes, I want to get back together? That's great. Now I'm left wondering what dream she's leaving me for. For that matter, whether she wants me back because of me or because she doesn't have a better alternative. Tyler? She said in my ear. Okay, I mumbled, wanting to get away from her for at least a little while. Sure, I'll think about it, okay? Thanks, she said, relief reflected on her face. I noticed there was no triumph. The old Christine would have had a look of triumph, pleased that she'd gotten her way again. But that look was gone. Was she genuinely remorseful? Let's go back and meet some people I haven't seen in a while, okay? Said I. She nodded, then lifted me to my feet and led me back to the deck. When we got there, I saw Allie talking to a group of people on the lawn. Our gazes met, then she shifted her eyes to Christine, who was holding my hand. Her lips pressed together and her eyes found mine again. Then, in a flash, she turned to respond to something someone in the group had said, and a smile appeared on her face. I spent the rest of the evening socializing with old friends and meeting new ones. Christine wasn't exactly hovering over me, but was usually at least close by. At one point, I saw her and Allie whispering, glancing over at each other. Just what I needed in my life. Drama. Chapter 14. The next day, Dad and I got Mom settled in, both of us spending a few hours arranging things the way she wanted and caring for her like the pair of clueless knuckleheads we were. Like I said, I had seen my mom many times since her stroke, but now that she was back home, it looked so sad. She was a small, frail lump of skin and bones, dressed in a baggy tracksuit and sitting in a chair. She was 58 years old, but looked 20 years older. Her hair was a mess and seemed even more gray. Her skin was pale and gaunt, and she could only communicate by slurred speech. Some words were slurred and barely legible, and by pointing with her left hand. Her right hand still lay at her side, practically useless. Let's go, I said, when things were back to normal. I took her right arm in my hands and began doing the stretching, strength, and motor skills exercises we were instructed to do with it. That's how the first day back went. Hard work on exercises and speech, with the noise of a televised baseball game in the background. There was one bright moment, though, when Daddy put her dinner on a tray in front of the TV. What's this? She asked, and the words sounded oddly familiar. Dinner, he proclaimed, proud of his progress in the kitchen while she was gone. Pot roast with potatoes and carrots. Really, she said, losing her temper. The expression on her half-paralyzed face said she didn't believe him. And I'd been eating Dad's roast at least once a week for the past few months, so I had to agree with her assessment. So Mom was obviously still sharp as a tack. The doorbell rang at 11 on Sunday. Christine, I said, looking up to see her standing on the doorstep, holding Ben in one hand and a basket in the other. Take him, she said, as she leaned the baby in my arms and walked past me into the house. What are you doing? Dad started when he saw her. I'm sorry about the last time I was here, Christine cut him short. I'm really sorry. And you were right about everything, and I know it. He nodded, shifting his gaze from her to little Ben squirming in my arms. I swayed my hips gently and held onto him as best I could. Anyway, Christine continued, walking past Dad into the dining room and into the kitchen, calling out over his shoulder as she went. This morning at church, they said Sally was coming home today, so I figured it wasn't a good idea to subject her to a bad cookout on her first day. Mom snorted. Too late. Dad frowned, shifting his gaze from the kitchen to Mom and to me. Then he focused his gaze on the little boy wriggling in my arms, and his features softened. Get him down, Dad said, crouching down and holding out his arms. I lowered Ben to the ground, and he walked over to Daddy. Really? Mom said, shifting her gaze from me to Ben and back again, and the left side of her face lit up with a look of hope. Your grandson, Christine confirmed, leaning against the doorway and watching. Her smile was wary, and her body tensed in anticipation of the inevitable barrage of questions. But they didn't follow. Instead, Dad picked Ben up in his arms and carried him over to my mother, placing him in her lap. I swear to God, I never thought I'd see her so happy again. An extra 20 years disappeared for nothing. When I turned around, Christine had already disappeared into the kitchen. She froze when she heard my footsteps behind her. Thank you, I said. It's... I let the words pass over my ears, but she understood. Her whole body relaxed, and she continued to arrange the dinner plates. I'm not hungry, I said, as she picked up another plate. She turned to look at me. Really, I said, smiling. Just not hungry. Oh. She looked disappointed, as if her first attempt to win me back hadn't gone as planned. But I'll help you feed Ben, I said. After all, now that I have a son and all, I might as well learn to take care of him, right? She smiled, pleased with my recovery. A few minutes later, Dad helped Mom to the dining room table, and we all sat down to eat lunch. Christine sat next to Mom, chatting casually about Ben and all the various joys of parenting she had experienced, occasionally wiping Mom's mouth with a napkin. She looked like the Christine I'd fallen in love with, a sweet, adorable 15-year-old girl who was everyone's favorite. Dad was eating fried chicken, mashed potatoes, and gravy, sharing every other forkful with a bouncing and very dirty Ben, who sat on my lap, staining his shirt and my pants with half the food offered to him. Nice, Mom said, looking at Ben and me, her eyes shining. Christine turned, looked at us, at me trying to wipe the potatoes and gravy off with my sleeve, and snorted. Welcome to fatherhood, she said. Then, meeting no reaction from those around her, the laughter left her eyes and she looked sad. I only smiled back. Guess I'll have to make up for lost time, huh? She tried to smile back. Better late than never, Dad said, picking up his plate and carrying it to the sink. You doing okay, Ma? Mom only nodded, her eyes fixed on Ben as she chewed her food slowly. Christine? He asked. I'm fine, Christine said. Let me get that for you. She got up and walked over to the sink, rinsed the water off her plate and put it in the dishwasher, then busied herself with the leftovers. She brought enough for at least 3 meals and took her time putting it all away in the fridge and cleaning up the leftovers on the counter. I took that time to wipe Ben's mouth, then moved to the chair next to Mom and whispered in his ear, Grandma, chicken, and table. Damn, I didn't know what to say. I just knew Mom was bright when he was around. When Christine finished, she turned around and froze. This was much harder for her than I thought it would be. It was written all over her face. Everyone could see it. Regret, sadness, a mask begging for forgiveness and wondering why she'd ever done what she'd done. She tried to speak but ended up clearing her throat. I'm going to get some fresh air, she said, and rushed to the back door to the street. I looked at Mom and Dad. Come on, he said, holding out his hands. My turn. I passed Ben across the table into Dad's massive hands. After standing for a moment, I went outside and walked around the house. Christine was nowhere to be seen, but I could smell cigarette smoke from the direction of the woodshop. There you are, I said, turning the corner. She was sitting there, clutching her cigarette and trying not to cry. When did you start doing that again? I asked. She looked at the cigarette in her hand. Sorry, she said, trying to let the smoke out. No. Keep going if it makes you feel better. She nodded her head a few times, took a deep puff and held it in, then spoke, exhaling the smoke along with her words. I just didn't think it would be this hard, you know? You wouldn't have come back. I'd never see you again, right? It would have been so much easier. Still not telling me about Ben? She shook her head. No, not that kind of thing. Truth be told, I started to realize what a complete mess I'd made when his hair didn't get any darker and his eyes stayed blue. 6 or 7 months ago. She looked at me, trying to catch my reaction. I didn't say anything back, preferring to listen. She turned away to look at the woods adjacent to our property. I shouldn't have done any of that, Tyler, she said, her voice sluggish. None of it. I shouldn't have listened to Mom or Scylla. I shouldn't have come back here and dreamed about what I could have had. I should have focused on working with what I already had. With what we already had. She snorted. Something funny? I asked. She looked back at me for a second, then at the forest. I traded loneliness for pure misery. She laughed again, but it was a bitter laugh. You worshipped the ground I walked on. Randy wanted to entertain me. I mistook lust for love. Then when he found out I was pregnant, he proposed. I'm still not sure he really loved me, but he definitely liked the thought of me coming home every night, having a son, and I don't know. What? What don't you know? I asked. He wasn't you, okay? She said, and the tears she'd been holding back finally came out. He just wasn't you, and all I wanted was you. I would have dumped him in a second if I thought there was a chance you'd take me back. I'd have crawled through 1,000 miles of mud if I'd known you'd take me into your arms when I arrived. But it was too late. I'd already ruined everything. Everything. So I've decided to settle for the dream world I've created here. So why now? I asked. Is it just because Randy left? He didn't leave, she said. I moved out, me and Ben, the day after you handed me the papers. That surprised me. So when you were in court? We'd been living apart for a month. Then why did you... What the hell is this? You challenged the DNA test. You're going to try to take it away from me, she whispered. I felt the anger rising in me. Is that what this is about now? No, she sobbed. This is what the trial was about. But not now, Tyler. That's not why I'm here. That's not why I'm trying my hardest to show you that I've changed. She looked at me, tears streaming down her face. Some of her hair stuck to the blush on her cheeks. You can see that, can't you? You know I'm telling you the truth, don't you? I see a little scared girl, I said. A scared little girl who's squandered her whole life, and now she's afraid of losing the last thing she has. She shook her head back and forth. No, Tyler, that's not true. I want us to be friends. Even if you never take me back, I still don't want you to hate me. You can. You have every right to. I said nothing, keeping my mouth clamped tighter than a tick. I know all about your book, she pleaded. I know you have enough money to bury me in court, to possibly take Ben away from me. I know that, Tyler. Allie told me, and she also told me she's very good. The book. That they think you're going to be famous. But I don't want any of that. I don't want any of that. She turned away and tried to hold back the tears, wiping her face with her hands and hiccuping from the effort to contain her emotions. Tyler, you let me keep Ben, and I will never deny you contact with him. I don't need your money. I will support him on my own. But I want him to know his father now. I know I was wrong. I know you have no reason to believe me. I know that. But I'm asking you to give me a chance. And you're sure it's mine? Christine sat down on the floor, leaning her back against the workshop wall and tucked her legs under her. When you came back to town, I was afraid something like this would happen. So I went online and ordered a DNA test kit. I took some of Randy's DNA while he was sleeping, swabbed Ben and mailed it in. There's no way Randy is the father. She looked up at me, seeing the skepticism on my face. You'll understand if I don't trust you on this one, I said. She just stared at me. Who else have you slept with? Said I. No one, she replied. Just you and Randy. All my life it's just the two of you. She smiled sadly. I guess that's why I wasn't as hot in bed as you said. Maybe I should have read more or rented some pay-per-view movies on the dirty channels, huh? I sat down next to her. Well, I said, looking out into the woods. Maybe I was exaggerating when I said that. She nudged me with her elbow. What? Exaggerated? Exaggerated? Well, she nudged me with her elbow again. Okay, maybe a little. A little? She said, turning to look at me. Maybe even more than a little, I said. A little more than a little. Shithead, she said, pushing me to the side. Hey, I protested. But she just laughed and stood up. Let's go, she said, and walked back towards the house. Time to put Ben to bed. By the time we got back to the house, Ben was sound asleep, curled up on Mommy's lap. She was gently stroking his hair, and Dad was watching from across the room. After leaving them alone, I went upstairs with Christine and showed her the new book I was working on. She was impressed with the outline, and even more impressed with the story I had already written. However, she cringed when she realized that the ex-wife was herself. You think this is bad, I said, reaching into the box next to my desk and pulling out the manuscript of the first book. Read this. We spent the next few hours chatting about old times, laughing at acquaintances, and just enjoying each other's company. However, there was that elephant in the room. An elephant I wasn't sure I could ignore.